Welcome back to the Deeper Dive podcast, produced locally in the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. Here at Sacred Heart Roman Catholic Church in La Plata, Maryland. My name is Bill Winnell, joined this afternoon by Father Larry Swink.
Good afternoon.
And Monsignor Charles Pope.
Oh, good afternoon.
Today, in case you haven't heard, there's been an election and a flurry of executive orders that have caused many in the church to speak out on. And I thought we'd give our two priests an opportunity to do the same. A lot to talk about immigration and deportation and other Asians. So, Father Larry.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm sure many of us, probably most of the country, watched the inaugural address. And we saw some pushback. And we want to look at some of these issues as a Catholic. And I thought the address was quite good compared. I thought it was strong. And I think there were some great points that he brought up. But let's first start off with this mega focus on immigration. And I think what happened is yesterday at the National Cathedral, the Episcopal Bishop, I guess her Bishop Bress, whatever you call her, she basically just read the Riot Act to President Trump. It's so embarrassing the way she approached it, and was sort of chastising him for his approach to immigrants, and that she made the comment that not all immigrants are criminals, and we realize that. I come from immigrants, and so did Monsignor Pope, and so did Bill Winnell, and so did everyone here. But the question is okay, is Trump wrong, or from a Catholic perspective, to be a little bit more strong against immigration and protecting the borders? My opinion is he's not wrong. But Monsignor, let's kind of look at Catholic social teaching, and how do we look at immigration as a Catholic in a way that's prudential and also with a sense not everybody just jumps the border and becomes American.
Yeah. Do you think, though, Father Larry, maybe we could first address a related issue? What was it appropriate for this Episcopalian? She's called a bishop. You wouldn't be a bishop to us, but I mean, just out of respect, we'll refer to her by her title. But this bishop, was it appropriate in that setting to speak this way? Because, I think all of us do want our priests and clergy at times to be prophetic, to speak the truth to power, et cetera. We certainly want that when it comes to, say, abortion and things. And I think there are some, even among Catholics, who think, yeah, good for her. She really raised some important issues, especially about immigration. You'd have to sift that out from some of the other stuff that we might discuss later about all this LBGTQIA alphabet stuff that I just weary of. But even if one just focuses on immigration, was this the time and the place? Now, I would argue no, even though I'm not unhappy that clergy feel at times they need to speak the truth to power. But there are a number of things I think that are wrong with it. First of all, she doesn't follow the order of correction established by Jesus. Secondly, the whole context of that gathering, and I've been there before. In fact, I brought my choir 8 years ago for Trump's, imagine an African-American choir. We went and we sang at that event, and we sang, bless our land, Lord. Even those who don't agree, we came together and we said, we're praying for this new president. And the tone of it is meant to be, like St. Paul says, that we're there to pray for our leaders, that we can live a peaceable and godly life. And by the way, Nero was on the throne when Paul wrote that. Now, come on. So in other words, you see, this is possible for us to pray for people. And not mean that we're supporting everything they do. So, number one, I think it broke the purpose of a gathering like that, which isn't to do political confrontation, and that would be, I think, the first problem I have with it. And I think generally people of goodwill and Catholics should also agree, whether you like what she said or not. And a lot of us or our listeners probably don't like what she said on any of these issues. But the point is, even if you did agree, I think this is not the place.
Right. Well, here's you make a good point, and I was sitting there thinking when I watched the homily, I was like, wow, that was pretty courageous in terms of I don't agree with her at all, but it
Mhm.
was pretty courageous to do something like that.
Mhm.
She took her I guess her dogma, and she
Mhm.
made it so that this is what I'm gonna talk about. I'm gonna speak for these people.
Mhm.
And I mean, let's flip it. Let's say, for instance, it was someone who was adamantly for abortion.
Mhm.
Should the bishop say something
Mhm.
about that at that
Mhm.
event? And
Right.
probably not. Maybe not. Maybe
Not
that's
at that event. No. Yeah.
exactly. So let's go into that a little bit, Monsignor. So why would you
Mhm.
say, just listeners would be like, would they have been praising her if she stood up for abortion or
Mhm.
against abortion? And
Yeah. Right.
even though Trump has showed that he's for the most part against abortion, would that it's still
Mhm.
inappropriate? Why?
Mhm. Yeah, and again, part of it, again, I already said, is the gathering, the nature of the gathering itself. I
Hmm.
think it violated. And also, when you add to that, you got a captive audience.
Yeah.
You're not the president is not able to say anything unless he were to
Right.
stand up and just yell back, which would be even more inappropriate. So it's not fair. It's not. It's a kind of a captive audience, not just of him, but a lot of his supporters and others, who probably also felt that she underrepresented. Let's just take the immigration issue for a moment, and say, well, but there are other issues to be concerned with too, whether it's the numbers true or not. But 300,000 missing children. We have fentanyl coming into the country. Our borders are out of control. A lot of crime. These things need to be, addressed. Likewise, obviously, with the LGBTQIA stuff that she mentioned, I think at the end of the day, a lot of people, just for sincerely held religious beliefs, say that's just not something we're able to celebrate or hold up, and getting into our face and demanding that we hear their weeping and so on at a moment like that is, we have no time to say, well, on the other hand, have you considered what the sexual revolution has done to families and to this nation? So we have no time or ability to say that. But the other final thing I want to say, because I've given you two answers already, the nature of the captive audience, the nature of the gathering, but there's a third thing that was failed here, which is the order of correction. And so
Mm.
Jesus in the gospel says, if your brother sins against you, or you've got something against your brother, whatever, go tell him about it privately, just you and him.
Right.
And maybe he'll listen and you'll win him over. If not, bring in a couple of witnesses. And if you don't listen to them, bring in the church.
Right.
But the point is that there's an order to fraternal correction, which she was attempting to do, or maybe, to speak, but she wants to correct or change the way he thinks. Now, look, she's the Episcopal Archbishop of the city of Washington, as is Cardinal Gregory right now, and soon to be Cardinal McElroy. If they call and ask for an appointment with the President of the United States, they're probably going to get it at some point, maybe not right away, drop of a hat,
Right.
but
Yeah.
that's the way you go there first. You speak, say, "I'd like to
Yeah.
speak to you about this. You're one of my parishioners," or whatever you want to couch it. But I need, and maybe even bring a couple of bishops. But the point is, talk to him privately, express the concerns, make distinctions, have a real conversation, not just a lecture to. And kind of she was a scold. She was just being a scold up there, and that's never good preaching either. I don't. I try
Right.
not to scold the congregation. I try to say, look, we've all fallen short. Let's improve or something. Anyway,
Exhort it.
but
Yeah.
you see what I mean by the order of fraternal correction, and so I think. And I hope that some of our bishops, especially the local ones here, will have some opportunity, maybe or the president of the bishops' conference or someone to say, we'd really like to speak to the president about some important Catholic distinctions. And I think you and I can talk about that in a minute because you did raise that. And we can talk about the Catholic position on immigration. But I think those are the three reasons that I think what she did was inappropriate. And unfortunately, you have mentioned that there are some Catholic publications even that have praised her. And I think, again, set aside the issues themselves. Was that the question I would ask them to answer is, was this the appropriate place or time? And the answer can't come back, well, that's the only time she had. No, no. She, of all people, as a religious leader of a prominent congregation in the diocese and rector of the cathedral, for heaven's sakes, has every chance to make a meeting and speak with him and bring some folks with her if she wants.
Yeah.
And she didn't do that. There's no evidence
There's a
anyway.
breaking of decency and decorum.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think there was a certain degree of of goodwill on the president's part. There,
Yeah.
there is a somewhat of a little bit of history between these two.
Yeah.
I know it. There was
Mhm.
a lot going back and forth when when he made his walk across to St. John's across Lafayette Park
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
That
Right.
falls under her area, and she had a lot to say about that then, and yet he still showed up. And
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
to your point about
Right.
Yeah.
So, well, let's look at some of the highlights from the speech, and I thought one thing I was really,
Highlights?
yeah,
Okay, go
I
ahead.
mean, yeah,
I
well,
know
I
I'm
mean,
good.
well, I thought, one of the things I just as a Catholic priest, I just, and I was sitting with my parents watching this. It was on
Mhm.
Monday, and when he said, no more, we're gonna have two genders, and
Yeah.
it was so beautiful
Yeah.
that he just went biblical and he said male and
Mhm.
female, he made them. And he didn't say it like that, but you were sitting there like, we're just going to go to some basic, and he said commonsensical thinking.
Mhm.
And it just, you wonder how many Catholics today would appreciate this, that this man is actually looking to bring us back to some sort of, you know,
Sanity.
yeah, sanity. I mean, exactly. Like we've been talking about Veritati Splendor. That was
Mhm.
Veritati Splendor, sort of personified with basically a non-Baptist, non-baptized person. That he stood for truth,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
I was really edified by that. I wonder. I don't know. There was that much. I mean, of course there'll be some pushback on that, but
Mhm.
I think the way he presented was just sort of people like, okay, like for now on, when you go into
Yeah.
to the doctor's office, what are you, male or female?
Yeah. Right.
Got to make a
It's okay
decision.
to ask it that way. Yeah.
Right.
I will say that there are some distinctions to be made here too. That is to say that I'm going to set aside. When you said the sermon or speech, I thought you meant the
Oh,
bishop's thing, but you're talking about Trump's. I would say that there were a lot of good elements to it, and that was certainly one of them. Namely, I think what he's mainly saying is, he can't forbid people from, in their own community or their conversations from getting into all this nonsense, but that officially the government will recognize male or female, and that we certainly can't be forced to use pronouns and other things and
right.
be accused of crimes or, censures or punishments in public settings anyway. And
Right.
I think that's an important thing because, again, people are forcing their insanity on us. And we all know that this is insanity, but it was a campaign of fear, of pressure, of
Yeah.
bullying that led to a lot of Americans kind of falling into this stuff. And
Mhm.
it's time for that to end. And I think that's what I find liberating about not just him, but others now who are beginning to wake up and say, this is crazy talk. And same with like that DEI. I mean, you're enshrining racism
Right.
into hiring practices, which is precisely what Dr. King and others fought against. Merit-based, nothing with the skin color, and so on. Anyway,
Yeah.
these are the kinds of liberating things. It's okay to come out and talk about that. I think a lot of people feel freed and liberated that way.
I think people feel relieved. I think in general, most normal people feel rather
Hmm.
relieved by this. And I
Yes.
don't, I mean, people have their struggles, people have their problems, but I think it's just like, we're not going to force this upon the American population anymore.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and I just thought that was just so relieving. Let's kind of segue back to,
Okay, just one more thing, Father? I'm so sorry.
please.
But just to say this, I will say that I don't want to go without saying that I think some of the tone of the president's speech was unnecessarily invective, especially with, again, he had a captive audience, and the people he's sort of accusing of it are sitting right over to his I guess his left,
Yeah.
and I think. I forget exactly how he put some of the things, but the president, the current situation, they have misled you. They've done all these kinds of things. And I think he could have said, he could have been more general and
Yeah.
still made his case for what he positively wants to do.
Right.
And I think it was perhaps at times a little too personal and again, I think it violated the kind of graciousness
Yeah.
that you want to try to have in settings like that. Anyway, just some thoughts on
Yeah,
that because I want to be fair because
yeah, and there was a bit,
there
there was a high level of hubris in that speech too.
Yeah,
You know that
yeah,
this will be the greatest era of all time, and blah
yeah,
blah blah. I'm like,
right.
well, okay,
We are the ones we've been waiting for, or Barack Obama said, and
right.
we laughed and scorned at that.
Obi-Wan Kenobi, you know, yeah.
Yeah,
And
right.
I just thought it was a little bit over the top because
Yeah,
there's a lack of humility. Like, you know, I'm human.
yeah,
I might make some mistakes, by the way, you
yeah,
know,
right.
which you're looking, I mean, you're looking for in a leader, like, you know, I'm fallible just like the rest of you.
That's not on
And
the art of the deal.
yeah,
What
yeah,
mistakes?
yeah. So I agree with that.
Yeah, yeah.
I felt the tone was a little bit,
At times, yeah, at times.
it had a lot of hubris, a lot of
And it had a
pride.
lot of beautiful heroic ideas too, you know?
It did.
It had
It
both.
did.
So, yeah.
So, so let's go kind of going back to, you know, everyone's talking, well, not everyone, but it just seems like there is this
Mhm.
big, and this was actually one of the major points of the election, which is a church issue. We do get involved with this in terms of, you know, we do have teachings on this, is the whole issue of immigration. And I know in the Old Testament it says, you know, we are to not to, you know, we are to, you know, care for the immigrant and
Mhm.
so forth. But how do you explain to a Catholic the way we are supposed to approach this from
Mhm.
a healthy Catholic standpoint, taking all the politics out of it?
Yeah. So I want to say that the best place to begin, I think, is our catechism. 2241 is the number of the paragraph that we're
Mhm.
looking at here. And it's very balanced. It's challenging. It's also reaffirms, though, that nations have right to borders and so on. So let me just read it if I could, Father. 2241 in the catechism. The more prosperous nations are obliged, to the extent they're able, to welcome the foreigner in search of security and the means of livelihood which he cannot find in his country of origin. Public authorities should see to it that the natural right to immigrate, in other words, is respected, and that places a guest. I'm sure that it should place a guest under the protection of those who receive him. On the other hand, it says political authorities, for the sake of the common good for which they are responsible, may make the exercise and right to immigrate subject to various juridical conditions, especially with regard to immigrants' duties toward their country of adoption. They are obliged to respect with gratitude the material and spiritual heritage of the country that receives them and to obey its laws and to assist in carrying out civic burdens. I just can't say it much better than that. I think it's very balanced. It does speak of a natural right to emigrate and immigrate. See, some nations lock people in, won't let them leave. Other nations try to, maybe inappropriately at times, keep people out. There's a natural right that the Catechism speaks about that people have to immigrate. And we know this because it's always happened everywhere you've gone, you know? There's always people going in search of something better. And there's, again, something of the natural law in that. It's also something called the universal destination of human goods, that God gave all the gifts of this world for all the people of this world. So again, all of these are ways of saying there are natural rights involved here. Now, that said, the so the more prosperous nations like ours should be generous, but not endlessly. Or, in other words, it makes the distinction to the extent possible. Should be generous. So again, we can't be just unlimited. Just all 8 billion people come on over. It's just
Right. And there's
so.
a
Go
and
ahead.
there's a
Yeah.
difference between you know, a legal immigrant that sneaks across the border and someone who
Yeah.
goes to the proper process also.
Exactly. Right. Following just laws. See.
Right.
Now, that said, we'll get to illegal immigrants in a minute, but I think we just want to start there. That look, the balance is nations should be generous. Okay, and that's our call. It's the challenge, but also those who come should follow just laws that are erected for the common good. It doesn't just protect the country, receiving country, but those who immigrate. How much of human, sexual, social, emotional abuse has been caused by all this illegal immigration with these traffickers and people who take exorbitant amounts of money to bring people across the border? There's terrible things, also the fentanyl, all the kinds of other things that go with illegal immigration. And so I think that it's to protect the common good that these rules exist. So again, it doesn't mention the right to secure our borders, but that's mentioned elsewhere. That those in authority have the obligation to provide security and so on. Sorry about that. Somebody loves me. I'll just turn the ringer off. and so on. So I think, Father, that it's a great place, to begin and to emphasize certain things like the natural right, but also the common good. And this is
Right.
this is the balance that we want to find. Now, first, I want to say that we as a nation have been incredibly generous in receiving immigrants. We are a nation of immigrants. I think we've been more than generous and can continue to be. But again, as you say, things need to be done in order, and the borders need to be secure, but things need to be legally followed. And this protects justice and the common good.
Yeah, and it also keeps. I mean, now granted, there are people that maybe they would not come across the border because of criminal activity in their own country, right? And so
Right, right.
this is one of the things where, out of prudence and the safety of our country, we have to also be careful. So I think it's not that I think that the Catholic Church would agree with this, is that, yeah, I think that, people have the right to come into our country, but as you said, in a way that's
Mm.
through with a due process that makes sure that they'll be taken care of, and also that we have the resources to take care of them at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, yeah. It's I've been really thinking about the now speeches in public, and sort of decorum that we should um, approach things, especially when we're dealing with authority and in our
Right.
presence, right?
Mm.
Um,
Sure, sure.
in your estimation, what's the best public speech you've ever heard when in front of someone of power that people didn't get along?
Hmm. I guess my own. No, just
He said
I can't.
his answers every Sunday, of course, at my
Yeah.
homilies.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that Mother Teresa had made a sort of a public statement with they were giving her, of all things, an honorary degree in social work at Georgetown University. I mean, it's like naming Jesus a Monsignor or something. I mean, it's just silly. But anyway, they gave her this degree. I mean, she wrote the book, for heaven's sakes. But anyway, but I would say that while President Clinton and others in the Democrat Party and all were there, along with some others, she did speak to abortion, but she addressed the nation. She wasn't just rebuking
Right.
the president, or when she says America, America. And so I think in that way you go broader. You don't just say you, Mr. President, or you need to hear this. And she spoke to all of us from her heart. And I
Mhm.
think that's probably a much better approach if you do have to speak these things. She probably could have, but I mean, she's not the type to ask for an appointment with the president and, try to correct him privately first and so on. She's a foreigner. She doesn't have time for that. But I think, so, I think that what she did was more appropriate because of the way it went wider and included all of us and asked us to look to our hearts and see if this nation isn't one of the poorest nations on the earth, that we
Right.
can't recognize or welcome a new child.
Right. Right. On that last note, Monsignor, we have the March for Life coming up this
Mhm.
Friday,
Yeah.
and today would have been the day of prayer and for
Mhm. 22nd, yeah.
the legal protection of the unborn. It's been, I guess, in our diocese, moved to Friday during the March.
Yeah.
Um, where do you see this moving in terms of the where we stand on abortion? Do you still think that we're miles away, years away from an overturning this on a state level? Do you think the March for Life
Mhm.
is still a necessary component where we you know gather publicly, in front of the Senate, or should we focus more on the state level? I mean,
Okay.
as Catholics, I mean, because I know I still to this day, when you preach about it, there is
Yeah.
sort of there's a pushback.
Yeah.
There's a
People are
definite.
hardened
They're
in their
very hard on.
positions. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was in
Mhm.
the reflection today on the reading, and I guess mistakenly said it was the day of the prayer of the legal unborn, which it is
There it is.
nationwide.
Yeah. Right.
But I was saying, when I was talking about in the gospel, where
Mhm.
our Lord, after he had after he had healed this man, the Pharisees went out and immediately took counsel with the Herodians against to put him to death. And this can be really the reaction of people when you bring up the issue of life issues. People get very vitriolic.
Yeah, right.
So, where do you? I mean, you've lived through this in a much longer. Well, not much longer, but longer than I have. And
Mm.
and where do you see this going?
Yeah. Okay. I also want to say, if Father, we could also just return to another aspect of immigration, maybe later.
Sure.
I want to get back to, but um, I frankly, I'm not optimistic. Could I say about the pro-life movement right now? And I don't mean that absolutely. Let me clarify what I mean. I think we're still fighting as if Roe v. Wade had not been overturned. We won that battle.
Hmm.
And we were disciplined and focused. And it took us more than 45 years, but by gosh, we did win that battle. And we have this thing returned to the states. But now I think we have a difficulty in retooling. And I've been asking around with pro-life leaders I know. I'm not talking about just someone who's I know that's pro-life. I mean, the real leaders in the movement, pro-life movement, behind the scenes and other places. And I am glad to hear that they are meeting and trying to come up with new understandings, that there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes. But I don't think we figured out yet what to do in this new landscape. It's harder to fight 50 different battles. And even if we say, well, we won the battle in this and that state, it's not won, because they're going to be challenged constantly by lawsuits, and many Catholics, and as well as other citizens in those states that have sort of either banned abortion or limited it, have a lot of ambivalence. And so we really do have 50 battles on our hands in terms of the constantly being, what can we do now to establish better middle management or middle leadership? We always kind of focused on the big march in Washington. It was a federal issue. And we all sort of knew that if Roe v. Wade was overturned, it wouldn't necessarily ban abortion, it would return it to the states. But I don't think we were prepared.
Right.
And I'm not sure we know yet exactly how to do this, and how to. I know what the liberals do in all their issues, and that is that they do a good job of building relationships with middle management, so to speak, in movements, and doing a lot of training.
Hmm.
They train and they train and they train 2 times a year at least. When I was involved with a more liberally based thing called the Interfaith Network, I mean, they train twice a year. You're expected to go off and retreat and really meditate, and not in a religious way, but I mean, really focus and think through and build models and listen to best practices and
Right.
go and execute the plan. They're good at that. We are not. And I'm not saying we're not doing any of that in the pro-life movement. I do know there are meetings taking place, but I don't think right now we have a clue
Right.
about what to do in the new environment. And we fumbled it a little bit.
Yeah. No, so probably not in our lifetime when we see this.
I hope it's not that long, but you're right.
Yeah.
We're
So
getting up
let's go
all
back
our.
to the other issue on immigration that you were gonna
Yeah.
bring up, Monsignor.
Well, I think when we look at the question of illegal immigration, and again, I'm trying to do this as a Catholic. There are some. I don't like the phrase mass deportations. I think that's an unfortunate political cudgel that is meant to terrify and scare. I don't think we're going to. I love this country too much, and I've been a American citizen too long to know we're not going to do mass deportations, 8, 10, 12 million people being pushed out of the country. It's not going to, we don't have that in our heart or our national character. So I'm confident that we won't literally engage
Right.
in mass deportations. Now, even the president himself limited his comments to criminal elements
Right.
among the, and I think there's pretty wide consensus on that among Americans, that those who have committed crimes, especially serious crimes in this country, need to go. If they're a member of a gang, or they've been found smuggling fentanyl or selling drugs and other things like that, they've got to
Right.
go. That's it. They just have to go. But when we get though to some of these newer levels where, okay, I've heard some absolutists say, well, they did commit a crime. They illegally came to this country. Well, sort of. Not everybody did that. Some people came here and maybe whatever status or green card or whatever expired. Now, that's a small number, but let's just say they're not here illegally in the same way that somebody just brazenly walked across our border. But even more so, Father, think about this. For the last 4 years, they have been told, we're going to roll out the red rug for you. We got a debit card waiting for you, man. We got a nice luxury apartment up in New York City for you to live in. For a period of time, we're gonna forget our laws. They don't matter. The border's open, man. Just come across. We're not going to enforce it. They were told that literally, and I would say not literally, but certainly almost literally invited. Come, come. You will be welcome. Are they here illegally? Who did that during these 4 years in the same way as, say, somebody who brazenly walked across when our laws were much more clear and enforced? What do we do with that? How do we sort all that out?
Right.
Also, we have other, like you say, this whole question of birthright citizenship. That'll go to the courts. And the president said that, by the way, in his press conference. I mean, his whole presidency's become a press conference, but I think he said that in the Oval Office while he was signing all these bills. Well, what about birth? He said, well, don't you think, Mr. President, the question was that this will go to the courts? He said, yeah, I expect that. And that's part of the reason we're doing this. I think we need to call this question. We said, we're the only country in the world that has this thing. And if it is part of our Constitution, we'll obey it. But right now, I don't think that we have to obey it in an absolute sense. And he has a lot of qualifications. For example, would we enforce that? Let's say that he did make a change that if someone is born tomorrow in this country, they don't just get birthright citizenship. But what if they were born here 8 years ago or 12 years? Are you revoking their citizenship? You see, I think somewhere how retroactive, there's a lot of the devil in the details kind of stuff that needs to be worked out. And I hope our bishops will be careful, prophetic, yes, but careful to know what's really in the executive order. And this time, what are the actual contents? For example, we was having a discussion today with somebody about how he's requiring all the federal employees to go back to work 5 days a week and so on. Well, that's not quite what the directive says. There are exceptions, and there are things that, again, it's not an absolute. It sounds really neat. I'm going to get them all to go back to work, those lazy government workers, blah, blah, blah. And he gets his political points. But the actual presidential decree, I haven't read it all, but it has a number of important distinctions. It doesn't mean everybody is going to have to go back to work all 5 days a week. And sometimes that just doesn't make sense, to go into work every day when you can work better remotely. So I think somewhere we have to make sure that we're arguing the real issue, not just what the press says about it.
Right.
I think as bishops, I hope our bishops will be cautious, not just to say, Trump's getting rid of birthright citizenship. Well, but if you read the actual document, there are some distinctions, and I don't know them all. I'm not a lawyer. Also, it will go to the courts, and that's part of his reason. He wants that to go to the court. He's not just so he's doing it more to bring it to the courts. He wants that battle. He wants that to be clarified, and I think it's okay to stay in the discussion with it. I'm not so sure we need to continue birthright citizenship going forward if no other country does it. But the question is, what about people who came here and, that's been
Right.
how the law has been. So I think all of these are the kinds of details I want to be careful about. We can just talk about illegal immigrants got to go with a cudgel and not realize, well, wait a minute, what kind of illegal?
Right.
And what do we mean? What's the, because just kicking people out.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we have to be more, even if you wanted to just strictly argue from strict justice, we don't. We're Catholics and Christians. We look to mercy.
Right.
And so somewhere, let's try to bring the jets down here a little bit and stay in a longer conversation. And I do hope that our bishops will, on their side, try to do that. And I hope that we also, on the side who do have legitimate concerns about illegal immigration, especially an insecure border, will also cool our jets a little bit and stay in a longer conversation. Has anybody really, for example, considered, what about people for the last 4 years that came? They were practically given the red rug. Come on in. Did they really come here illegally? Technically, yes.
Yeah, but
The governing authority said we're not following those laws.
Right, and it just went. It was overboard. And I think too, it's keeping everything to a prudential mean.
Yeah.
Using the virtue of prudence. I mean, that's how we look at these issues, and we have to be prudential about them.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously we're all about helping immigrants. That's always been our teaching. But I think it's just there's always these hyperbolic statements that are made in the media.
Yeah.
Like everyone's going to be shipped out in cages. Like, well, who said that?
Well, yeah, but that is partly Trump's fault because he talked about massive deportations begin
Yeah.
on day 2.
Right.
And, and so what do you mean by massive?
Yeah.
I mean, the criminal elements are going to be probably a good number, but massive?
Well, quite frankly, having worked for the federal government for 25 years, there's not a chance that this could happen on the scale that they would like to think, number one.
Yeah.
Well, also the money it would take to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of research, money, talk about wasting money. You have to also be careful of that. I mean, we're trying to save money here and not lose it. So I think, I just think it's the nature of how he speaks those times, like with these hyperbolic statements, I'm sure there's going to be curtailed a little bit, like, well, maybe not massive.
Yeah.
I think,
but again, he did sort of curtail it in his inaugural address. He kept it to illegal, criminals who have violated our law since they've come.
Yeah, and certainly one of the most egregious things that has come out of the open border thing is the fact that I think everyone generally agrees on both sides that the number of these missing kids is frightening.
Yeah, sex trafficking?
200 to 300,000 missing kids that just have disappeared.
Whatever happened to them?
Yeah, it's awful, and that is one of the things the Catechism speaks about. The protection of children, especially human trafficking. In this immigration process,
it's horrendous. The human cost of illegal immigration. That's why this bishop we get back to earlier. You want to say that people have anxieties about this whole immigration policy, but also acknowledge that other people have been sore vexed. That law that was just passed, the Lincoln Riley. Anyway,
can you remind us what that was, Monsignor? Can you remind us what that?
Maybe Bill, could you?
She was just one of many, unfortunately, victims of a violent crime by an illegal immigrant, and of course, both sides use it to their, for the political talking points and everything else. But she's not the only one. There are many, and it was particularly brutal.
Yeah. So again, and there's that woman on the subway. God, she was burned to death by. Oh, anyway, no, you get the idea. We have all kinds of issues with our criminal justice system, and too many really dangerous criminals walking the street. So it's bigger than immigration, but it's terrible. There's a human cost that she only looked at part of it.
Yeah. Well, there is also in my current parish, a lot of police officers hang out there. They love our parking lot, so I'm friends with a lot of them. But they've been terrified, by the judicial system in terms of to do their job, because they're always afraid that they're going to be blamed for something. And just for the last couple of years, we just don't touch certain things.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is, part of the Christian message is to bring justice when justice needs to be met. And that's why we have a justice system, to make sure that, the streets are safe, and it has to be done well, of course, but,
right.
So, right. So, we got a few minutes left here, Monsignor.
Yeah.
So what sort of circumventing around back to either the whatever you call it, the sermon from the Bishop Mudd.
Yeah, well, could I maybe comment a little bit too on the general tone that President Trump strikes? I think that you've heard that expression, don't take Trump literally, but take him seriously.
Yeah.
I think, first of all, let's do a couple disqualifiers about President Trump that I think we have to factor in when we look at his style, which is combative and bombastic. Clearly, he has. So it's clear. But I want to just say, and no disrespect to people, but he's from New York, and especially from Queens in New York. Remember Achibanka?
Yeah.
So again, God gives us voice to reduce the population, anyway, he's a very, it's just a kind of a bombastic, open, like a salesman. I got a deal for you. I got somebody I work with from Queens, New York, and great fellow, but it's it's all about the deal. Oh, Father, I gotta get some work. I gotta get some money. I got a deal for you. You're gonna just weep when you hear the price I'm about to offer you. You will be so shocked. How can he do it? How can he possibly do it for that price? And then I asked him, okay, well, what's the price? Let's say to restore a chalice is what we're looking at. Oh, I gotta get that done for you for $3,500. What? That's the greatest price. You'll never get a price like that anywhere. I said, I could buy a new chalice for that. I'm not gonna do it. Oh, but Father, and then, the art of the deal. You ask for if you want 10,000, I'm sorry, if you want 5,000, you ask for 10. And this is kind of what he does a lot of. It's a very common tactic, not just among the people in New York and New Jersey, but who bring with them sort of that, that's kind of the stick or the motif that they bring. But it's very common in Semitic settings too. When you go to Jerusalem, everything's a deal. I got a deal for you. And it's not a deal you can't refuse. It's a deal you can refuse. But anyway, the idea is that, and it's that back and forth on price and boasting of your product. Your product's better than anybody else. Welcome to Trump Towers, the most beautiful building in the world. And I even mean like the Vatican, it's just that's a shtick. That's a kind of a New York. It's a common thing. And a lot of Americans are alarmed by it. But I tell you, go walk the streets of Queens. Go walk the streets of the Bronx, or over in New Jersey, in Bayonne and places. Just walk those streets, and you'll hear a very similar thing. So part of it, just factor that in. There is a cultural element here,
Right.
that offends a lot of Americans, but is a very common way that many other people in the world do business.
Right. No,
and it's a rough and tumble, but that's normal to them.
Yeah.
The other thing to say about him in that same regard is if you read the book, The Art of the Deal, you'll find, again, like I just said, he gives these little basic rules. If you want 10,000, if you want 5,000, you ask for 10. You go in with an outrageous proposal and you might get 15% of it. But if you go in with some common sense thing, you'll get nothing. So you go in, I want to buy Greenland, or I'm going to consider Canada to be another state, 51st state, and it's outrageous and so on. But suddenly people begin to think, well, okay, that's just silly. But then he begins the real negotiations, which are, look, we want to buy some futures in these rare earth elements in Greenland. We want a way in. We want to be part of the breadbasket. What can we do? And you start to, after you've scared them with the extreme stuff, you work with the stuff you really want to do.
Right.
Even the Panama Canal, that's basically a cudgel against China. And yes, he's picking on Panama, and maybe they have been charging us too much. But the point is, he's really after China there, if you listen to him. And on and on I could go. But just don't take him literally, but take him seriously and realize that he's going to go in there loud and proud. So he can walk out with a deal that's something more than pathetic.
Right. Yeah.
And people aren't used to that.
No, they're not.
And we should become more used to it, though, because we used to be more like that.
Yeah.
And Peter Kreeft gave a wonderful talk, by the way, at the Catholic Information Center last week. And he made this point. He says, we're at war. And he's talking about the church now. But we don't behave like that because we spend most of our time trying not to offend, trying never to, cause any ruffle or something. But we're at war. We don't act that way,
Right. Yeah.
And we have to sometimes be bold and say it plain, and we just won't.
Right. No, it's so true.
And that's why people who don't like Trump find him so refreshing.
Well, it's like saying the comment. I mean, we preach, we say that more often. There's two genders.
Yeah, right.
We're at war.
Right. And thank God I've been taking that battle for a long time now. I had people walk out on me for saying something so obviously true. Let them walk out. That's probably the wolf. We don't want the wolf in our congregation.
Right. It's like, what did I say that didn't make sense? I mean, this is commonsensical. Yeah, I know. It's just, and I appreciate that. I appreciate, like boldness and leader, showing leadership. But I mean, obviously, we're gonna have to see what happens here.
And I get why people don't like Trump. I get that. But I
yeah,
hope that at least maybe take into consideration. I'm not saying I really like him, but I
yeah,
respect that.
he wants to get things
He's
done.
still a mensch. He's still got the, pardon the expression, he's still got the male equipment. He hasn't handed him over, and he's not gelded. And he's kind of, I think that people kind of long for leadership like that. And leaders like that do sometimes cause outrage among their opponents. But
Right.
I think in this nation, but certainly culturally, we are at war.
Yeah.
There's
Right.
two very different,
Yeah.
visions of what the country should be, what the culture should be. And they're not really compatible. You can't just sort of compromise on a lot of issues. Well, let's just say there's 15 genders. It's foolish. There's just two.
Right. Right. That would be a great podcast, by the way, Monsignor. Like biblically, where does it say we're at war, and how do we approach that?
Yeah.
I
Right.
mean, it's just, you make up a great point. It's like, I was trying to make the feast of the baptism exciting, which sometimes, it's hard to do that, but it is. But the idea of the oil that, that you put on the baby or on the adult, represents, being oiled down for a wrestling match to wrestle free from the devil. And there was this image in the early church that we've kind of lost in the modern church, which is that we're in this daily struggle against evil. And
Yeah.
we have to put up a fight. And I think the nice thing is,
Yeah.
right. Just like, so, well, we'll see. Well, anyway, great stuff, Monsignor. Thank you for kind of clarifying the whole thing on immigration for us. And also like sort of the decency how we should approach leadership when we're addressing them,
Yeah.
to do so in a way that's, right and just, but it's also, there's a time and place to do things in a manner in which we do things. So awesome. May we have your blessing.
Yes. By the way, if you're interested in the Peter Kreeft article, talk, you can certainly go to YouTube and just type in his name, Peter Kreeft, and then Catholic Information Center. It'll pop right up. It's about an hour. It's not that long. It's with questions and answers. It's really worth listening to.
Yeah. Maybe Bill, you could post that.
We'll do.
Great.
Yeah.
Now, may the peace and the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit come upon you and remain with you always. Amen.
Amen.